Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and welcome to Patriot Radio, broadcasting live from deep inside the heart of the future Liberty State. Brought to you once again by On Fire Ministries, in the legacy of Dr. Stan Monteith, bringing you the story behind the story and the news behind the news, where it's not about right or left, it's about right and wrong. It's about our hope not being in man, but in Jesus Christ. About not ending in prayer, but moving to action. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Father, deliver us from the evil one.
Welcome to Patriot Radio.
Good afternoon, fellow patriots. This is Matt Shea, and today on Patriot Radio, Washington, D.C., on Yom Kippur, the Million Woman March. Also, it looks like Israel is about to strike back soon. And on the local front, some interesting developments regarding my comments on weather modification. And one of the stalwart patriots running once again for elected office in Idaho, Phil Hart, completely vindicated and completely exonerated. Again, he is a huge benefit to Idaho. And I hope if you're living in Idaho and listening to Patriot Radio, you know who he is and you know what he stands for, because he has paid a bigger price than most anybody I know to get the truth out. Here on Patriot Radio, we want to prepare you for what is coming. In fact, what's already upon us. But there's no fear. We were made for this. And so at the end of this brief today, I'm going to give you some very specific things that you can do in the lead up and to following the election. But first, subscribe to us on Rumble, subscribe to us on Telegram for real-time intelligence analysis, and breaking news. People ask me all the time, well, where do I go to get my information? This is a place you can go. This is one of those places. We're going to bring this up again at the end of the briefing, but please subscribe to us on Telegram and be in the know, way ahead of everybody else, so that you can keep your family safe and you can be a blessing to others in a crisis. All right, that brings us to our Bible study today. And we're going to be in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 17. This is an interesting passage because it's sandwiched in a whole bunch of other things. But here's what it says. Only as the Lord has assigned to each one, as God has called each, in this way, let him walk. Only as the Lord has assigned to each one, as God has called each, in this way, let him walk. Here is why I'm bringing this up today, because each one of us is going to play a special part in the events that are coming, the events that are ahead, what's going to happen right after the election. Each one of us has been put here in this time by Jesus Christ for this exact moment. We've been called. Some of you have denied that call. You haven't listened to it. Well, it's about time that you do. And God is going to call some of us into places where we can shine the light and expose the darkness. Some of us, we're going to be passing the torch on to the next generation with our wisdom. Some of us, we're called to actually go evangelize the lost. Some of us, we're going to be called to be a blessing and to organize being a blessing in a crisis. Whatever you have been called to in that walk. And tonight around the dinner table, take a moment with your whole family and pray and ask the Lord, Lord, what have you called me to? And maybe you haven't listened, and ask the Lord to bring it to your attention again, to your remembrance. And when he tells you, write it down in your journal and walk it out, because it's going to take all of us walking in the calling that God has called us in this time to see this republic restored and preserved for another generation. And that brings us now to your daily intelligence briefing, coming to us from the globalist front. Disinformation isn't the problem. Government cover-ups and censorship are the problem. Technocracy is principally the science of social engineering made possible by advanced technology. Your brain shuts down when overloaded with lies and confusion, leaving you in a psychotic state. technocracy has done away with the old-fashioned gulag surrounded by barbed wire and armed guards, replacing it with a virtual electronic exile and imprisonment in place. How do you become resilient to propaganda? Well, one way that you can do this is actually in a great book written by General Flynn and Boone Cutler on fifth-generation warfare. It's actually a series of 3 books. If you haven't read it, please read it. The last book is What the Church Can Do to Fight Against Fifth-Generation Warfare and Propaganda out there from the Marxist media outlets who just lie with impunity. And in fact, they always are accusing Christians and demonizing Christians because what they're trying to do is escalate violence against Christians. And I'm going to get that out here in just a few minutes, so stay tuned for that. But the way that you come against propaganda is very simple. It's the truth, and it's with your own networks of people getting the truth out to them. Now, some people, they may not listen to it, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't get out the truth. Some people may be upset at you, but that doesn't mean that you don't get out the truth. Now, you say the truth in love, but the fact of the matter is, if people are denying the truth, do you really want them to be a part of anything that you're doing? Jesus Christ himself said to Pontius Pilate that he came into the world, that his purpose was to come into the world to testify to the truth. And Pontius Pilate answered, what is truth? He literally asked the foremost authority in the universe the right question with the wrong motivation. So some people don't actually want to see the truth because, well, it makes them responsible. Number one. Number two, they have to admit they're wrong. And arrogance and ego, at least at this time in history, and well, it should be for all time, should be thrown out the window. So tonight as well in your prayer time, ask, do I have some arrogance and ego that I need to get rid of so that I can hear, that I can see the truth? And that brings us now to the China front. This is a very interesting development, and I've seen this before, actually. The U.S. military got really upset about the idea of bringing back flamethrowers, but every single Taiwanese defense planner assumes the PLA forces will make landfall in some strength. And while the highest point of vulnerability of such an invasion force would be in transit, the Chinese forces would be in transit across the strait, a comprehensive layered defense plan should be in place in Taiwan. I couldn't agree more. Now, a Chinese soldier is exercising with a flamethrower. Now, here's the thing. I hear people say, well, you know, there's this convention or that convention. Okay, well, are the Chinese abiding by these things? Do you think they really will in warfare? They're communists. Of course they're not going to do that. And perhaps that the United States needs to reevaluate its doctrine regarding civil defense, reinstitute National Guard armories in the major cities in the United States, doing a layered defense, a defense in depth from the coasts inward, and that Taiwan should follow suit with that. Because that's exactly what Ukraine did, and whether you like Ukraine or not, whether you like Zelensky or not, that defense in depth was extraordinarily effective at stalling one of the largest and supposedly the most fearsome armies in the entire world for years. So let's take a look at war fighting again. And if we actually want to win wars, what would it take to do that? And that is decentralized civil defense, just like John F. Kennedy advocated, and return to that. There's been some great papers, by the way, put out by the Center for Security Policy on this issue. That brings us next to the 28th edition of the Maritime Exercise Malabar 2024, hosted by India, is underway off the coast of India. Ships, submarines, and aircraft with special forces from India, Australia, Japan, and the United States are participating. And it looks like India is getting closer to the United States. The U.S. and China are in a tit-for-tat military basing battle, China consolidating a military presence at Cambodia's Ream naval base, while the U.S. deploys Typhoon missile systems in the Philippines. The Chinese are trying to expand their base presence, but the United States is way ahead of them. That's why the Chinese are using an elite capture scheme with leadership in these island nations, because they understand that if they do not have that, the United States will once again use a very successful strategy against China that they use against Japan. Also, China says Taiwan's leader is hell-bent on independence. Okay, Taiwan is an independent country. Chiang Kai-shek is the true leader, or was the true leader, of China. Now, I don't want to get into the history here, But certain Marxist forces in the U.S. government sold out Chiang Kai-shek. And he went to Taiwan because it was a defendable island, Formosa, the actual name. And since that time, they have been a separate country. The weird thing is, why would you recognize a communist country as being a country at all? It's not a country. It's tyranny. Which brings us now to the Middle East front. Coming to us from the Insider paper, fantastic. Go ahead and like and follow them. Erdogan is to visit the Balkans to boost ties. This is a very interesting development because the Caliph wannabe is going into the Balkan countries. And that can only mean that he is trying to solidify the Islamic presence there. And if you don't know, the Muslim Brotherhood, the foremost terror grouping in the world, the father, the grandfather of modern terrorism, started by Hassan al-Banna in 1928 to reestablish the caliphate. That's their direct purpose. Operates out of Turkey. And their spiritual advisor, al-Qaradawi, who is now passed on, recognized Erdogan as being eligible to be the caliph. So when he's going into the Balkans, that is a very dramatic escalation. And once again, is he really a NATO ally? Also, Israeli special forces eliminated 4 Palestinian terrorists in Nablus. The undercover Israeli special forces eliminated the commander of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, Balata Battalion. And wild what they did. They just pulled up in civilian cars and took those guys out. And this is pretty amazing that Israel is doing what the United States should have been doing a long time ago, and that is taking out actual terrorist networks instead of trying to label Christians as terrorists. The Israeli defense minister has stated that his country would strike Iran, and I want you to pay attention to this, with such a deadly, precise, and unexpected strike that the Iranians will not have time to understand anything. Very interesting, the terminology he's using, and many analysts believe that retaliatory strike is going to happen soon. Reuters reports, though, that on the heels of Iran saying that if any Arab country allows Israel to use its airspace, that will be considered an act of war, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar will deny Israel access to their airspace for airstrikes against Iran. But here's the real play that's happening. These Sunni countries of Saudi Arabia, UAE, they want Israel to take out the Shia terror network because they don't have to do it. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes here. But nonetheless, Israel is making some dramatic advances. And again, when I say this stuff, these are geolocated and confirmed advances. Hezbollah had erected a statue of General Qassem Soleimani, who was responsible as one of the worst terrorists in the world. I mean, that's just a fact. The statue used to point toward Israel from a mountain in Lebanon, and now an Israeli flag flies there, and that statue has been torn down. The advance of the Israeli military can be seen here on this map. If we can bring this up here right now. You've got, just as I had briefed last week, they are striking in, the Israeli military, along the Litani River, taking up a blocking position up there in the northeast corner, and then also coming south of Tyre with their navy and pushing up to essentially box in everyone involved in Hezbollah and all their positions and ammunition dumps, etc., south of the Litani River. And that brings us now to the Russia front. So, very interesting development on the Russia front, in Europe at least. Now, most people will not say this, but Nelson Mandela was a communist. And the ANC is communist. So Mandela's son, a South African MP, has been denied entry in the UK to attend a Palestinian solidarity meeting in Sheffield. Now, here's why I bring this up. Because at this moment, the communists and the jihadis are working seamlessly at the international level You have the OIC, which is the largest voting bloc in the United Nations, and you have the Socialist International, which is the second largest voting bloc in the United Nations, which is why they have condemned Israel more than any other country. I mean, it's just a fact. So they're working seamlessly at the international level, but they're also working seamlessly now at the national level and in some places at the local level here in the United States of America. So it's very interesting that the UK now is realizing that there is a connection and denying that entry. But essentially, I had a friend of mine put it this way. If you went to one of their meetings where you had some of these communists and jihadis at this meeting, you would have the jihadis wearing Che Guevara t-shirts, and you would have you're following me now, the communists wearing the Palestinian t-shirts. So that's exactly what's happening here. So understand these two forces are not working in opposition. They are working together, which is why we saw Palestinian and why we're continuing to see pro-Palestinian protests on university campuses here in the United States. Like what I'm saying or not, that's a fact. And that brings us now to $35 billion loan to Ukraine by EU countries has been given a green light, but where is it coming from? Frozen Russian assets, which is very likely to be one more notch, bringing us closer to war with Russia. Also, Romania has selected the Turkish-made Cobra 2 armored vehicle for its military, ordering over 1,000 units. They're actually going to be manufacturing most of these units in Romania. And so Romania and Poland, once again, quickly arming up for war with Russia. Also, a series of secondary explosions cascade through a Russian storage facility housing hundreds of Shahed 136 attack drones, Ukrainian cruise missiles successfully hitting the facility. This has happened in the last week on dozens of different targets, from Crimea to places inside Russia proper. And we're going to continue to see this happen, and at some point the Russians are going to strike back. It's just the way it is. And I think that that's the point. I think that's the intent behind what's going on, that they want to foment a war with the United States. So, one of the other things that I wanted to highlight right now, before I get to the national front, is that whatever is going to happen in the Middle East is going to happen before a conflict between Taiwan and China, or a conflict between Russia and NATO. They're keeping these wars going because the globalists on both sides, the Western globalists and the Eastern globalists, they want a world war so that they can usher in a one world government, one world religion, and one world economy. This is not speculation. This is what they have said many times. So, what's the greatest obstacle to that? Well, the United States of America. And that is what brings us to the national front. Eric Metaxas. Christians who think not voting is an acceptable option have believed a satanic lie. Yes. Not to vote is to vote. And by the way, the very first lie of Satan was, did God really say, in regards to what Adam and Eve could or could not do? And really, this satanic lie was to get Adam and Eve to stop governing the earth, the inheritance that God had given them. Godly governance is dominion. Now, the Marxists are doing this whole gaslighting thing now about dominion, whatever. It's in the scripture. You can go read it. But the fact is, Jesus Christ was clear about this. So was Paul, that we have an inheritance here on the earth. This is not the enemy's land. It's not the enemy's world. It's ours. It's our inheritance through Christ Jesus. So, the idea that we're not supposed to be involved in governing, or that as of the people, by the people, and for the people, that we're not supposed to govern as Christians here in the United States, is a satanic lie. And it's the same lie and trick from the beginning, that Satan doesn't want you to govern because he wants evil to come in. And when godly people are governing, evil is driven out. Not to vote is a vote. It is a vote for evil. Plain and simple, period. End of story. You can't sit on a fence when God has asked you to be on his side. Notice how I said that. And the greatest issue today is that Christians are not fulfilling the commandments of God in Scripture. And God says, love is to obey my commands. So he has commanded us to be his ecclesia, his governing body here on this earth. Therefore, if you are not doing that, you are in sin. James is very clear on this. If you know the right thing to do and you do not do it, that is accorded to you sin. In other words, it is a sin not to vote. It is a sin not to govern as God has called us. Now, some of you will be like, well, that sounds pretty condemning to me. Is that truth and love? Yeah, it absolutely is love, because if you don't do this, you're going to visit evil on your own family. So the loving thing to do is to say, don't do that. Do what God commands, obey his commandments, and vote. Don't sit this out because of some lie you're listening to. The Christians shouldn't be involved in politics. Listen to this very carefully. This isn't a political issue. This is a biblical issue. And Jesus Christ wants to redeem every area of the world. There's not one area of the world that he's turned over to darkness. So why are you turning an area of the world over to darkness? Jesus Christ is our example. Let's follow that. That brings us to this outrageous article. So-called judge throws out attempted murder charge against woman who saw an easy target and nearly stabbed innocent Arizona college student to death. Horrendous story. Now been thrown out. I don't even... The people groan when there is not justice in the land and there are not just leaders. I think it's time that we turn that around. Also, Afghan man who was charged with plotting an election day terror attack worked for the CIA. Well, that's interesting. Nasir Tawhidi was a security guard for the CIA in Afghanistan. Tawhidi entered the United States in 2021 on a special immigrant visa. Such visas went to Afghans who worked with the U.S. prior to the Biden administration's withdrawal. After the refugees passed a Homeland Security screening, obviously not a good enough screening. Wow. Well, that's going to be raising a lot of questions. Wonder who else is here in the United States that hasn't been vetted. Also, Kamala Harris's blue wall is crumbling before her eyes. New battleground poll shows incredible Trump surge. This is happening all over the place right now. People have been asking me, I think one of the biggest indicators that Trump is going to win is that Zuckerberg looked deathly afraid on an interview I saw recently, and in fact is trying to rebrand himself as some sort of a libertarian, which means they know what's about to happen, and he's afraid he's going to be held accountable. Also, an interesting discovery from the Oversight Project. Geofenced ad data to find devices that were at Ryan Houthis' Hawaiian residence in the past 3 years. They found 441 unique devices. These same devices, interestingly, pinged around the world. I wonder what that could mean. There needs to be a full investigation into this, because this makes it look like there were foreign agents connected to this guy. And, well, the question should be, are there foreign agents connected to this guy? And the investigation should continue. Fascinating. By the way, this was posted, or at least reposted, by J. Michael Waller. All right. We're going to have him on here soon, too. We're going to discuss that specific post, because that's incredible. Also, a professor was suspended after calling for male Trump supporters to be lined up and shot. And see, this is just one more example of how the left is trying to foment violence, and leftist media outlets are trying to foment violence against Christians and patriots. So why all this against Trump? Well, maybe this is a reason. Epstein victim, Virginia Giuffre, and I always mess that pronunciation up of her last name, backs Donald Trump for president. She knows the Epstein client list and is calling on Elon Musk to help reveal it. I think that's what they're afraid of. I think they're afraid of Trump and Elon Musk revealing this list. Also, the National Reconnaissance Office, which is in charge of our satellites, at least our military satellites, is set to add 100 satellites this year. The United States has 3,415 satellites. We're by far ahead of every other country. Most of the satellites that are in orbit right now are commercial, small portion military, but it seems very clear that they're preparing for war, adding 100 satellites. That's one key indicator. Also, good news story out of Colorado. Colorado Supreme Court has dismissed a lawsuit against a Christian baker who refused to make a cake for a transgender person. Another win for freedom of religion and freedom of speech. And now, from the local front. Senator Phil Hart, exonerated again. The Democrats tried to get him off the ballot, but Phil Hart is staying on the ballot because he proved he is actually a resident. Boy, they have come after him year after year, and he has persevered because he loves this country so much. And that brings us to weather warfare and what you can do about it. Now, I post and what you can do about what's coming. Sorry, not weather warfare, but what you can do about what's coming. But I will tell what we can do about weather warfare, weather modification. First of all, there's an actual treaty internationally. So I got some blowback on this by a couple people. I'm like, this is black and white, guys. There is literally an international treaty, if we could bring that up, that shows that back in the 70s, nations had begun using weather as part of modern warfare. In fact, it happened in Vietnam. And oh, by the way, it happened from airplanes. So people are like, oh, there's no weather modification airplanes. It's been around since the Vietnam War. In fact, we've had one of the scientists who was involved in that then classified project here on the show. So, I mean, come on. But what really shocked people, I think, is that weather modification is in statute, RCW 70A, in Washington State. Here's what's defined as weather modification. Means changing, controlling, or attempting to change or control by artificial methods the natural development of any or all atmospheric cloud forms or precipitation forms which occur in the troposphere. In fact, there was so much weather modification happening, so many permits and licenses were being issued, that they had to make exemptions so that there weren't so many permits and licenses being issued. So I got, I think, 40 gigabytes of public records on weather modification released to me when I was in the legislature. So here are the exemptions for laboratory research and experiments, research and development and experiments by state and federal agencies, institutes of higher learning, and bona fide nonprofit research organizations. Activities of an emergent character for protection against fire, frost, sleet, or fog. Now, this is where most weather modification is happening right now at airports when it gets foggy. Activities normally engaged in for the purposes other than those of inducing, increasing, decreasing, or preventing precipitation or hail. Inducing? Yeah, that's what it says. So, weather modification is real as a matter of fact. But I want to talk to you all right now about a quick alert that I put out today. There is a high likelihood following the election, regardless of who wins, of violence. There are increasing indicators of communist organizations here locally in Washington State and the Inland Northwest of organizing as we speak. This violence will be aimed at Christians and patriots. It'll be fomented by Marxist publications and media outlets. And in fact, as many of you already know, that demonization of Christians and patriots has been underway for quite a while. However, if Trump wins, their plan is for there to be more violence than if he doesn't. So what can we do? Number one, go to church and make Jesus Christ your Savior and Lord, because we're going to need his guidance. All of us are going to need his guidance in the days ahead. Number two, be prepared for at least 8 weeks of food and water and to be a blessing to others in a crisis. North Carolina and Florida right now being very instructive on this front. Also, I'm going to have a special recommendation right now. You're going to want to write this down. Special recommendation. You need to be able to get information even in a crisis. And one of the ways you can do that is through a single sideband radio. A Texan PL 880, PL 368, or a Sony ICF SW 7600. I posted this online. Great options in that vein, but also a Sangene ANT 60 shortwave antenna that you can clip on the top of it. The Texan is the best, okay? So if you're going to go for a Texan 880 or a 368. from my recommendation. All right. But this will allow you to get information even if the internet and even if self-service is down, like we've seen in North Carolina and in Florida. Also, exercise your right to bear arms, be trained, go to the range. And lastly, number 5, subscribe to my Telegram channel, Patriot Radio US, for real-time intelligence and breaking news. And if we could put that up there, be ready, be in prayer, be a blessing.